Welcome back. We have a very special guest joining us today on East Texas News at 4. On a national level, she's covered some of the biggest stories over the past 30 years.
She's also a longtime former criminal defense lawyer. Today, we have Gray TV's chief national political analyst, Greta Susteren, joining us live in the studio. Greta, we really appreciate you taking the time to travel to come see us.
Oh, for me, it's like, the pleasure is mine.
Well, first off, we have some breaking news. Within the last hour, we have learned that White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders is leaving the White House and planning to return to her home state of Arkansas. What have you learned about this?
Look, I know Sarah Huckabee because I live in Washington, and this has been a tough job, and I don't blame her for wanting to go back to Arkansas. It's probably a lot more peaceful than Washington, D.C. is. And it's been hard for her because she has a president, whether you're for the president or not, who wants to control his own press, and as a consequence that, he makes decisions, it's harder work for him. If he doesn't have a communications director right now, and he places all the calls. So I suspect, I don't know, that she's just ready to have a more peaceful life, to try something new. She's had a great experience, and the reporters haven't always been nice to her. In fact, they've been rude to her when she was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Someone said something very rude in front of everybody, and everybody laughed. So, Sarah Huckabee, I wish her the best, and I hope that she enjoys going back home.
Okay.
Well, one of the other big stories, one of the biggest ever stories you actually covered, was the O.J. Simpson trial. It's been 25 years since the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, which has, of course, led to the O.J. Simpson case. You were a big part of that.
Well, not part of the murder, I hope, but
no.
I was a part of
but the coverage.
Yes. It's sort of how I got my feet wet on a national level, and I sort of accidentally fell into it because I was perfectly happy practicing law and teaching as an adjunct professor at Georgetown, and I just sort of fell into this and basically never left. Yeah. This was not the plan. In fact, when I was practicing law, the only lawyer on TV was Perry Mason. We didn't have legal analysts, so look how times
You were a
changed.
trailblazer with that.
Accidentally, not with any sense of courage or direction or vision. It was accidental.
Awesome.
So at the time, you were providing some legal analysis for stations as they were trying to get some type of perspective for people. What is it like when you're basically setting the stage, the precedent, that's something that's never been done before?
Well, I don't mean to belittle it, but it's a lot like a sport. You're explaining the process, and there are a couple of things I wanted the people to know. Number one is that the trial that you saw on TV was not the trial the jurors saw, because the jurors were oftentimes outside the courtroom when there was argument over evidence. So they heard a very different trial. The other thing I wanted people to understand is that jurors are not asked if someone's innocent. That's not what we asked them. We asked them whether or not there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, I was hoping to just do the nuts and bolts, explain it to, explain the process, because I'd been in a courtroom for so long. I've tried murder cases.
What's the most memorable part of that for you?
Well, it started my new show, Burden of Proof. Everything just kept happening. I didn't like the way it divided the country. I mean, who does? I mean, it really divided the country. And the one thing is that I was happy for people to understand what a trial was, and trials are open. The Constitution says they're open. So I was happy that, but people didn't like what they saw. A lot of the lawyers were showboating, the judge was showboating. So it brought out some of the worst part of us in the practice of law. But I also want people to understand trials, because trials have sort of been secret. Because people don't wander down to the courtroom much and look at them. But trials are open. This was the rare instance, I thought, when there was a level playing field. I represented poor people in criminal cases, and we didn't have a dime. And the idea that you could have a defendant who had some resources was quite unusual. And and it should have a level playing field. So it sort of skewed what happens on a day-to-day basis in a courtroom, because most defendants, and even a middle-class person, doesn't have the funds to pay a lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. So on a different political aspect, today a federal agency recommended that White House advisor Kellyanne Conway be fired for repeated violations of law prohibiting political statements. This is from a watchdog group. Is this kind of like mudslinging politics, or is this something legitimate that people should be concerned about?
Well, there is a law that says that you can't politic if you work for the government. So that, so that's true. That's the Hatch Act. I don't know, as we were talking about that before, I don't know if most Americans really care about this topic or not. I would be surprised if she were fired, because President Trump tends to be rather bold in supporting those who defend him. But it's certainly something that should be considered and looked at. But I would be surprised if she were fired. And sort of the more interesting aspect of this whole Kellyanne situation is that her husband is repeatedly attacking the president in op-eds and on Twitter and something. And imagine going home, and she during the day is defending the president, and then she goes home at night, and if they're still living together, and he's said horrible things about the president. So, I mean, sort of the dynamics of what goes on in Washington is very perplexing, I think, to most of the people across America. And I don't blame them, because it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, you can only imagine what dinner's like.
I mean, I can imagine your spouse is constantly attacking your boss, whether it's legitimate or not. I mean, it'd be terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and the poor children.
Well, we will be back to talk with you about something that's an important development that will be affecting you. So we'll be right back. Make sure you stick around and join us.